Folks, I recently encountered a Scrabble puzzle that is unlike any I've seen before. Created by mathematician Tim Chow and backgammon champion and Scrabble expert Nick Ballard, this puzzle has changed the way I think about Scrabble strategy, and I can't wait to show it to you. So let's dive in. At first glance, it's hard to believe that this puzzle is that complicated. Despite the fact that you're trailing by over 130 points, you actually have an 124-point play here in the form of ZEDONKS hooking coned. So, should we be thankful donkeys and zebras can mate and consider the puzzle solved? Well, not exactly. At this late stage of the game, there are only 2 tiles remaining in the bag, meaning there are 9 unseen tiles from your perspective. The most important tile to start with is the J. That's because there's a huge spot to play the J for 61 points, hooking Ab and Ivy to make Jab and Jivey on a triple letter score. The problem is, after playing ZEDONKS, one of 2 scenarios will unfold. First, your opponent can already have the J and simply slap it down for 61, outrunning any 2-tile combination you may draw in the endgame, or you'll draw the J and threaten that same play yourself. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Well, note the 3 L's remaining in the unseen tiles. Again, there's only 2 tiles left in the bag, so this guarantees that even if both of those are L's, your opponent will have at least 1 L on their rack already. This will allow them to play Ablate for 8 points, blocking your only possible spot to play your J, no matter what other tile you draw. They'll then be able to play off their tiles one by one while you're forced to pass your turn repeatedly with your unplayable J. The best you can do after bingoing with ZEDONKS now is to draw LL, allowing you to answer your opponent's jab with L for 13, losing by 4 points. Or in the Collins lexicon, FY, which allows you to play 5 for 26 after jab, losing by 3. Outcomes where you get stuck with your unplayable J are much worse than this. So now that we've established that playing your 124-point bingo never actually wins this game, leading to you either getting hit with a 60-point J play or being stuck with an unplayable J, it's time to come up with another idea. Even if you don't bingo now, you will need to next turn because you're down by so much. So the maximum number of tiles you can play and still threaten a bingo is 2. Something like adds or Z could allow you to draw MY from the bag, threatening monkeys for 111 points, potentially gaining a large number of additional points from opponents' unplayed tiles. But if you draw these 2 tiles, you'll empty the bag, giving your opponent perfect knowledge of your letters. And if you have monkeys, opponent must necessarily have the other 7 letters and will be able to block your only spot for monkeys with gel hooking bacterial. Or they can simply outrun your bingo by playing jab. You could play Zek for 22, trying to draw LM for dolmens, which will play in 2 locations that cannot both be blocked. But these plays don't score enough to actually win the game. Even the promising looking 2-tile plays fail to get the job done here, as either the resulting bingos play in only one spot that your opponent can block, or they just don't score enough points. What about 1-tile plays? You could play off your D here, aiming for the Y to threaten a variant word for a donkey-zebra offspring in zonkies, which would play for 128 points, hooking DITZ and sexy. If the tile bag contains the M and Y prior to this play, your opponent may also perceive the phantom threat of monkeys for 111. However, in this case, they'll have the J and still be able to outrun you with jab, defeating zonkies by just 2 points. In other similar scenarios, they can simply block both of these options at once with a play like Pelf, which still winds up winning every endgame. So, what's left to consider? There is one more proverbial card to play here. You could play off the Z by hooking DIT to form DITZ. Why would you do this when your opponent is so likely to have the Y, allowing them to hammer the spot with something like fly for 81? Well, what if they don't have the Y and you draw it? You would then have donkeys hooking DITZ with the additional points from your newly created hook, giving you an amazing 160 points. This is enough to outrun your opponent's J play. Of course, once again, they can simply block the spot, and the best option to accomplish this is gel for 35, hooking bronchial. But if the final two tiles in the bag are the exact combination of MY, your opponent will be facing a group of 8 unseen tiles that include both monkeys and donkeys as threats. From their perspective, blocking donkeys with gel could allow you to freely play monkeys for 111, getting 42 additional points from unplayed tiles, resulting in a tie game. On the other hand, your opponent could suspect that you're bluffing to distract them from the fact that you're actually going for monkeys, not donkeys. If they play gel in the upper right instead and you draw donkeys, you'll easily win the game on the strength of your much heavier out bingo. Making matters even trickier is the fact that you could play your Z in this spot. Once again, if the final two tiles in the bag are MY, they will perceive the threat of the similarly terrifying monkeys for 165 points, earning a huge boost from hooking DITZ to the triple and once again easily outrunning your opponent's J plays. However, just like in the other scenario, if they block this play with gel and you surprise them in the other spot with donkeys, the game will once again result in a 529 to 529 tie. Regardless of which position you choose to play your Z, your opponent has to try and decide whether your positioning of DITZ is an indication that you're straightforwardly going for the massively higher scoring of the two threats, or whether you're bluffing, trying to induce a block of the more obvious spot, only to surprise them with a bingo in the other and tie the game. Playing DITZ in either spot appears to be your only realistic way to gain winning chances in this game. So, where should you play it, and what should your opponent do in response? In other games like poker and rock, paper, scissors, we understand that there are certain situations where the optimal decision is not a single action or choice, but rather a balanced strategy. For example, in many poker situations, the correct decision is not to always bet, always call, or always fold, but instead to employ a mixture of these actions in some combination to avoid being too predictable. Similarly, in rock, paper, scissors, the solution to the game is not to always throw rock, paper, or scissors, but to balance your strategy, throwing some combination of rock, paper, and scissors, perhaps adjusting to the tendencies that you can observe from your opponent. In most Scrabble positions, the location of your setup is often an indicator of the word you're hoping to play. If you play your Z at the bottom of the board, your opponent's first instinct would be that you must be going for the big donkeys play hooking coned. And similarly, if you play your Z on the right, it certainly looks like a fish for monkeys. But if your opponent knows that you'll never bluff here and try to go for a bingo on the opposite side of the board from your setup, they will simply block the more obvious of the two spots and win every time. So, just like in poker and in rock, paper, scissors, your best way forward here is actually to employ a mixed strategy. Although this board position is extremely specific and you're not likely to encounter it even one time, let alone many times, the right approach here is to sometimes play your Z in one spot and sometimes play it in the other. This is in stark contrast to most Scrabble positions where there is a correct answer regardless of your opponent's actions or context of the game. Game theorists approach situations like this by defining the Nash equilibrium, a set of strategies employed by you and your opponent where neither player can improve their outcomes solely by changing their own strategy. For example, in rock, paper, scissors, Nash equilibrium consists of both players throwing 1/3 rock, 1/3 paper, and 1/3 scissors fully at random. This strategy is unexploitable by your opponent. To figure out the Nash equilibrium in our puzzle position, here are the 4 permutations of how the game can unfold from this point. You can bluff with the right side DITZ and your opponent either blocks the obvious spot, causing you to tie, or calls your bluff, causing you to lose. Or you make a straightforward setup of donkeys with the lower DITZ, and your opponent either blocks it, causing you to lose, or suspects a bluff wrongly, causing you to win. The mathematically determined, unexploitable Nash equilibrium strategy is for you to bluff your setup 2/3 of the time and make a straightforward setup 1/3 of the time. This confused me at first, but remember, a win is twice as good as a tie, so your opponent has more incentive to block the straightforward setup than to call your bluff. Therefore, your strategy should be weighted towards bluffs in an effort to secure more ties. However, there's still a human element to think of here. In rock, paper, scissors, if you detect that your opponent is throwing rock a suspiciously and predictably high percentage of the time, or in poker, if you detect that your opponent is never bluffing, then deviating from your Nash equilibrium strategy to, for example, throw more paper or fold to more big bets may be justified and achieve better results. So, is there a human element to this Scrabble position that we need to account for to achieve a better result? My friend Josh Sokol helped me talk through it.
This is also just a plain old Scrabble position. Sure, there's all this amazing theory behind it, but at the end of the day, you have to make a decision, and you can't do 2/3, 1/3. You have to do one of the two. You're never going to get this position again. If you are really interested in the beauty of Scrabble, I think you just deviate and you bluff. I think so. And there are many positions in Scrabble where you have to consider bluffing. You have this understanding of Scrabble at the top level where you know this sort of thing can happen, and it's usually just far more muddy, but the elements of it exist in very, very many positions, because most of the time, or a large amount of the time, in a Scrabble game, you don't have a clear best move. There are multiple choices, multiple paths, and you have to decide which one that you're going to take. And sometimes there is no right answer.
Appreciating these principles, the fact that they apply to many, many more positions than just this, is very exciting.
Yeah, some people, based on your personality type, maybe you really don't like the lack of clarity, and maybe you want to just ignore these sorts of situations, and that's totally okay too. You can play Scrabble however you want to play Scrabble. What's great is that no matter what sort of personality you are, if you like the creativity and the chaos versus whether you like just the control and the clarity and just everything being black and white, you can play Scrabble at an extremely high level. And nobody's going to tell you that you're doing anything wrong, because we don't even know. We don't know what's right. And that's what's important here, is that the more you know about Scrabble, the less you know.
These uncertain, equilibrium-based positions actually happen a lot in real Scrabble, not just theoretical constructions like the one we've been looking at. For example, what is the best play with this opening rack? Josh had this rack in one of his actual tournament games, and for the answer, check out his channel for a video on this topic. I'll put a link in the description. I hope you enjoyed this really cool Scrabble puzzle position. Once again, thank you to Nick Ballard and Tim Chow for creating it and sharing it with all of us. See you next time.